Such a silence had fallen over the cemetery that it itself began to measure the footsteps of people and the fall of drops from the gray leaves, if you don't count the steady mechanical noise of the lowering device and the quiet, brittle cry of Aunt Carla. The October air, sharp and transparent, penetrated my black dress, but I hardly felt the cold. I was in a daze after 3 days of endless condolences, organizing funeral rituals, and forced pretense, in which Paula's barely concealed. Satisfaction cut right through me, and I stood as if behind glass, incapable of movement, because inside everything was subordinated to one feeling, the betrayal of time and people. She stepped forward in her black, impeccably tailored suit, her step so coldly confident that the canvases of the sky seemed to shrink, and the words she spoke were meant to sound like a preface to peace. Before we let Durant rest, Paula said, "There's something everyone should know about Sophia," but for me, these phrases became a core, at the center of which arose the phrase, "my name on her lips," a venomous, caustic sound, and I felt my heart clench at the thought, for it had been waiting for precisely this hour, when my father was powerless to protect me, when I was most vulnerable among relatives and ceremonies. The woman pointed her finger at me as if I were evidence in someone's criminal case, and the proclamation, loud and merciless, echoed over the graves, "She has been living a lie for 32 years, she is not Durant's biological daughter." Sighs rolled in waves, Uncle Lorenzo dropped his prayer book in the mud, Anna squeezed my hand, someone behind me whispered, "Oh, my God," and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't comprehend that at my father's funeral, a treachery was being committed against his memory. I barely managed to utter "you're lying," and my voice sounded so alien, as if it belonged to someone else, distant and helpless. Paula pulled a folder from under her coat, and inside, as if proof of a prearranged performance, lay papers. Durant's blood type was O negative, Sophia's was Rhab positive. By these numbers and letters, by this cold formula, she declared, a biological relationship was impossible. "I have the medical records," she said, and her voice was pitiless. Gasper, my half-brother, stood next to me, tall and dressed in an expensive suit, grinning so hard I suddenly wanted to splash mud on his polished shoes. He drawled, "Sorry, little sister," and the sorry sounded more like triumph than regret. "It seems you're not really related after all. Mom's already talked to the lawyers about the will." The ground beneath my feet trembled, the world tilted. My father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me through the halls of school on my first day of work, who called every Sunday just to ask how my week had gone, had died 3 days ago, and they were already trying to erase me from his life. Paula stood at his grave and proclaimed, as if dictating the verdict, "He is not my father." And Carla broke her silence, and her trembling voice tore at the fabric of the spectacle. "How dare you? At his funeral, Paula." But Paula responded with the same polished gloss she'd worn over her lies for 8 years of marriage, "I'm simply telling the truth," and declared that Durant's true legacy belonged to his blood relative, Gasper. I suddenly remembered my father's hands, rough but warm, chafed from work and with the brief, caring gestures with which he'd mended my toy when I was a child, and in those memories I found a last bulwark against the crumbling fabric of accusations. Around us, people clustered in separate groups, whispering between versions and conjectures, and I felt loneliness become a heavy shroud, where only the memory of his voice and those quiet Sunday conversations could provide my protection. Paula held herself with regal indifference, but I saw the folder tremble in her fingers. Her vanity now seemed the most fragile armor. At that moment, Mr. Rossi cleared his throat against the large oak tree and spoke in a level, detached voice that cut through the confusion like a knife. He held his briefcase as if it contained not papers but an orderly arrangement. Eugene Rossi, my father's lawyer and longtime friend, had been present in my life through both celebrations and anxieties, and his word carried weight. "Mrs. Esposito," he said, his voice a death sentence, "before you continue this charade, perhaps we should discuss what Durant left in my care." Paula's expression faltered, she muttered something about absurdity, but Mr. Rossi stepped forward, his gray suit impeccable, and said that 6 months earlier, Durant had come to him with very detailed instructions and a sealed package. "If Paula attempts to claim that Sophia is not my daughter at any time after my death, you are to read this letter immediately and include this note." The cemetery had grown so quiet that even the sound of distant traffic seemed unreal, as if it emanated not from the world of the living but from the very air suspended between the slabs and wreaths. The 47 members of the Esposito family stood motionless, like figures carved from marble, not daring to move, not daring to blink, as if every second of waiting brought something irreversible closer. Even the funeral director, a weary and reservedly respectful man who had previously stood slightly to the side, now leaned forward, barely perceptibly, as if awaiting the denouement of a performance that had unexpectedly turned into a revelation. Mr. Rossi, maintaining the imperturbable dignity of a man accustomed to holding the keys to destinies in his hands, withdrew from his briefcase a large manila envelope, inscribed in his father's clear, recognizable handwriting. Beneath the line, "To be opened only upon discussion of the circumstances," were the words, written with a particular softness, as if my hand were trembling with emotion. "My daughter Sophia is my greatest achievement." The combination of letters made my throat crackle, my vision clouded, and I struggled to maintain my balance, preventing myself from falling into the abyss between memory and reality. Even in death, even now, in the moment of the most merciless attack, my father still protected me, as if his care had become an invisible shield, protecting my name and honor. "This is theatrical nonsense," Paula said, but her voice no longer had its former steely confidence. It rang like thin glass on the verge of cracking. "I have medical records," she added with the strained air of someone accustomed to winning an argument but suddenly lost their audience. "As am I," Mr. Rossi said calmly, and there was no triumph in his voice, only the weight of the moment foreseen. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket, glistening with moisture and drizzle, and added, "Durant was a man of incredible meticulousness. He left not only written evidence, but also his own words. So, Mrs. Esposito, would you prefer that I read the letter, or shall we hear the voice of Durant himself, explaining who his real child is?" The last words were so flat and cold that Paula instinctively retreated, her fingers clutching the folder convulsively, and Gasper's grin, so recently smug, stretched out, and predatory, disappeared, giving way to confusion. His eyes darted between mother, me, and Mr. Rossi, like a man doubting the firmness of his victory for the first time. "It's a trick," Paula said, and this time her voice trembled, as if a fear, long familiar but carefully hidden, had settled in it. "You're bluffing, Mr. Rossi." Didn't move, his face remained motionless, and only the wrinkles around his eyes seemed to darken. "Durant knew you would collect these documents, Paula," he said slowly, clearly. "He knew your intentions and that you would try to humiliate his daughter. That's why he entrusted me with the custody of everything that would protect her from what he called posthumous slander." A wave of strength rose within me, as sudden as a breath after a long dive. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. "Read the letter, Mr. Rossi. Let everyone hear what my father has to say." He nodded, and with the precision and reverence of a lawyer performing a sacred ritual, he broke the wax seal. The sound, short and dry, seemed to lift us from the ground, echoing through the rows of tombstones, drowning in the oak foliage, mingling with the breathing of those present. From the envelope, he pulled out several pages covered in that same handwriting, each letter a personal imprint. Official papers, seals, signatures, dates, lay nearby. "Wait," Paula said, her face turning the color of the leaden sky. "We don't need to do this here, we can discuss it later, alone." But Aunt Carla stepped forward, her voice, sharp as a shard of glass, cutting through the air. "It's too late, Paula, you made this a spectacle, now we'll see how it ends." Mr. Rossi adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, as if clearing his throat of other people's words, and began to read. His voice became an instrument through which my father spoke. "To my beloved daughter, Sophia," he began, and I felt a wave rise in my chest, so powerful it took my breath away. He still spoke to me, as if resurrected for a moment to complete what had been left unsaid. I knew that from then on, every word would be not just a memory, but a living pulse between the past and the present. My father wasn't just a parent, he was the anchor that held me in the world when everything else was crumbling. After my mother died when I was 7, he raised me alone for 15 years, until Paula burst into our house like a storm on heels, smelling of expensive perfume and promising to upend everything. I remembered the day he taught me to ride a bike in our driveway, the way his strong hands gripped the handlebars as he ran alongside, and the way his boots pounded the asphalt in unison with my clumsy movements. "Go ahead, honey, I've got you," he said then. "I'll never let you go." Even when he let go of the handlebars, I knew he was still there. He was a man of action, He owned 3 hardware stores across town, Esposito and Family Hardware, each one smelling of sawdust, metal, and honest labor. Every Saturday morning until I left for college, we would ride around them together, our little ritual, as sacred as Sunday service. He introduced me to every employee, every customer. "This is my daughter, Sophia, someday she'll be a teacher." The pride in those words made me feel taller than I was, stronger than I thought. He taught me to count washers and sort screws, and told me stories about Grandpa Esposito, who founded the first store with only $1,000 in credit and boundless determination. "All this will be yours someday, Sophia," he said, using my childhood nickname, adding, "Not just the stores, but the reputation, the trust, the very name Esposito." My mother had been gone for 15 years when Paula came into our lives, and with her arrival in the house, the very air seemed to change. It became thicker, heavier, filled with the foreign scents of expensive perfumes and an ambition you couldn't help but sense. I was 22, fresh out of college and starting my first teaching job at Riverside Elementary, where the kids looked at the world with pure wonder. And it might have been the last time I felt truly at peace. My father had met her at a Chamber of Commerce dinner, which he attended rarely, out of necessity, and had returned that evening with that peculiar expression that betokens a man certain that something significant has entered his life, as if it had started it all over again. She told me she had recently moved to the city, starting over after a painful divorce, and there was not only bitterness and weariness in her voice but also a carefully calibrated note of helplessness that could touch any man, especially one who had lived too long with the shadow of loss. She had a son, Gasper, a tall boy for his age, just starting high school, and she said she was looking for a role model for him, a support system, the father he never had. My father fell in love, unconditionally, swiftly, like a man finally deciding to indulge in the happiness he'd been deprived of for too long. After years of polite dates, ending with friends saying, "She's a nice woman, but she's not Rebecca," he suddenly came alive, began wearing new shirts, laughing again, inviting Paula to Sunday dinners, introducing her to our habits, our places, as if thereby affirming, life isn't over yet. She was beautiful in that exquisite, unattainable way that makes other women feel careless. Her blonde hair was always coiffed, her nails immaculately polished, and her clothes seemed to belong to another, more radiant world, where even casual movements seemed deliberate. She laughed loudly and confidently when my father joked about his hardware store, and she always said she was incredibly lucky to have met a man who knew how to create comfort and order. "I want you to like her, Sophia," my father said one evening as we sat on the back porch, wrapped in the evening air and the soft light of the lantern. "I know no one can replace your mother, and I'm not asking for one, but Paula makes me happy, and Gasper needs a man by his side. The boy has been through a lot." I nodded. I really tried. I wanted to be kind, open, help Gasper with his studies, invite them into our family traditions, the bond that connected us with my mother and with the past, where there was a place for love that didn't demand attention. But from the very beginning, something didn't work out. Paula's smile never reached her eyes, the look she gave me was more judgmental than warm, and every time I entered the room, her face seemed to tense slightly, as if I were disturbing some carefully constructed order. She started with small things. She rearranged the photographs in the living room so that my mother's were in the shadows, almost invisible, explaining that she was simply looking for a more harmonious composition. In conversation, she casually mentioned the store's value, peppering these remarks with a light laugh that seemed harmless but left an unpleasant aftertaste. After the wedding, the changes became more noticeable, though they happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. "Sophia, my dear," she would say in her sweet voice, "you'd probably be more comfortable dining in the room while Gasper and I helped Durant with the business plans." Or, "Oh, yes, Durant probably forgot to tell you, we've rescheduled our Saturday shopping trips, as Gasper needs this time with his new father." Each of these decisions seemed sensible, but together they formed a wall behind which a part of my life, my childhood, my right to remain close to my father, gradually disappeared. Gasper changed faster than I expected. At 15, he was already taller than me, with a sharp, slightly mocking face and the same cold, narrowed gaze as his mother. He spoke with cautious politeness, but there was something predatory between his words, as if he were testing the waters before setting foot. He joked about how his father now had a real son, that the shops needed a man's hand, that the Esposito name had to be carried on by a man, otherwise everything would lose its meaning. He never allowed himself to say these things in front of my father. He was his ideal, his authority figure, the man he emulated, but I saw. My father, as always, noticed more than he let on. He continued to get up at dawn so that we could continue our Saturday tradition of shopping a little earlier. Before Paula and Gasper woke up, "No one will replace my girlfriend," he said one day with a smile when Paula remarked that I was too old for such outings. He kept my photographs prominently displayed in his office, and called me every Sunday evening, as before, as if time couldn't destroy what we had created together. 3 weeks before his death, he invited me to dinner, just the two of us. Paula had gone to Nevada with Gasper then, to look at colleges, and the house breathed freely again. He made his famous roast, the same one his mother had taught him, and we ate in comfortable silence until he suddenly placed his hand on mine, strong, warm, and stained with oil from his work. "Sophia, I need to tell you something," he said, and I felt uneasy, but he smiled and shook his head. "Not now, the time has not come yet. Just remember, no matter what happens after I die, you are my daughter. Blood does not make a family, love does. I loved you from the moment I knew you would be born." I tried to joke, asked if he was ill, but he only shrugged. "No, dear, just getting things in order. A man my age should be ready. I have taken care of you, Mr. Rossi has everything you need. Trust him if anything happens, and remember, you are Esposito, my daughter, my true heir, and nothing, ever, will change that." 4 days later, he was gone, quickly, almost without warning, as if life itself had decided to spare him from prolonged suffering, and the doctor later said it was merciful, as if death, choosing its moment, had shown compassion. He was in his first shop, the very one my grandfather had once built, where everything still smelled of wood, oil, and metal, the smell of honest labor, the smell of his youth. My father had come there, as always, early in the morning, to check supplies, count tools, and leaf through old invoices that no one but him understood. They found him sitting at his desk, holding a photograph of my mother and me, from graduation, where I stood in a blue gown and a ridiculous square cap, in his hand, as if he were looking at us in that last second of life, and that was the only thing he wanted to see before he went. The funeral was grand, just the way he probably wanted it, without pomp, but with a dignity and respect that couldn't be bought. His employees formed an honor guard, 6 men from each store, their work shirts, usually stained with paint and dust, carefully pressed and buttoned to the last button, and over them, dark jackets that felt alien to their bodies but were worn with pride. The church was packed, people whose lives he touched, customers he helped, families for whom he was a quiet savior in difficult times, all gathered to see him off. There were coaches from the little league he sponsored, seniors from the Veterans Club, women he had once helped with repairs or simply with a kind word. Everyone knew he was more than just a store owner. He was that rare person whose kindness didn't require an audience. The organ began to play his favorite hymns, Amazing Grace and I'll Fly Away, and the melodies filled the church with a strange, comforting light, as if the very air reminded me of his soft humming on those evenings when he'd check bolts and screws, humming to himself, certain that anything could be fixed if only he knew how to hold the tool. When it was time to speak, I stepped to the podium, and my voice, a teacher's voice, accustomed to the silence of children, suddenly carried throughout the vast hall, even though my heart ached inside, as if my chest held tiny shards of glass instead of flesh. I told them about our Saturday mornings, when the sun was just beginning to touch the storefronts, and my father told me that business isn't about money, but about trust. I told him how he once kept the store open until midnight on Christmas Eve because Mrs. Patterson needed a part for her grandson's bike, and how he later said, smiling, that the best gift is the opportunity to make someone happy. My voice wavered only once when I mentioned that he always knew the names of all his employees, remembered their children, their illnesses, their dreams. I said that Durant Esposito believed that any tool could fix anything, but his greatest tool was love, that quiet, powerful love that heals not with nails and glue, but with patience and understanding. He healed broken hearts with attention, broken souls with kindness, broken families with acceptance. He was my father, my hero, my closest friend. Paula sat in the front row, motionless as a statue, in a formal black Chanel suit that shone softly, almost blasphemously, in the candlelight. Her face was frozen in a look of restrained grief, honed to perfection, while Gasper kept ducking his head next to her, checking his phone, his fingers nervously touching the screen, as if he couldn't bear to be here. Amidst someone else's grief, they both wanted to say something. It was clear from their gazes, from that inner readiness for action, but they couldn't find the words or didn't dare, yet. When the service ended and the people began to leave, Paula explained to the priest that she was too grief-stricken to speak, although I had heard her calling someone that morning, drily discussing the property valuation, as if it weren't a death but an accounting report. The funeral was modest, attended only by the closest people, family, my father's old friends, his co-workers. We drove to the cemetery, which was located on a hill, where the air was clean and the wind carried the scent of dry leaves. From this spot, the city was visible, and if you knew where to look, you could see all 3 stores, as if the very earth bore the mark of his handiwork. October was in full swing, the trees glowed gold and orange, like a living fire, and I remembered my father saying that autumn is God's way of showing off, showing that even dying can be beautiful. After the pastor said the final prayer and we whispered amen, the funeral director approached with roses. People took turns tossing them into the grave, and I was about to step forward when Paula suddenly stood up, not to say goodbye, but to speak. Her voice shattered the silence, fragile and holy, like a blow to glass. Before we leave Durant to rest, she said, there's something you all need to know, something he's been hiding. Sophia has been living a lie. A deathly silence fell over the church. My Aunt Carla screamed so sharply that someone ran up, fearing she might faint. Uncle Lorenzo, my father's younger brother, dropped his prayer book, and it fell into the wet earth with a dull thud. The pastor froze, unsure whether to intervene, but Paula was already continuing, looking straight at me with eyes the color of a winter sky, cold, empty. She said that while going through my father's papers, she'd found medical records hidden in his desk, and that these papers proved I wasn't his daughter, that my mother had had an affair, and my father knew but hid it, allowing me to live under a false name, claiming what should have belonged to his real family. I screamed, my voice breaking into a sob, it's a lie. Papa would have told me. We had no secrets. But Paula only smirked and pulled out a folder hidden under her coat. Your blood types don't even match, dear, she said coldly. Durant was O negative. It's written on the medical bracelet he wore every day. She held up the bracelet, my Father's Day gift to him, the one I'd chosen, carving the words, always there, dad and daughter, into the inside. And you, Sophia, she continued, are AB positive. I have a report from school where you donated blood last spring. Genetically, Durant couldn't be your father. The crowd erupted like a body suddenly pierced by a needle. Whispers turned into loud discussions. Discussions into heated arguments, and questions hung in the air that brooked no answers. Is it true? Blood types don't lie, do they? Poor Sophia, how could he keep such a secret? Gasper stood next to my mother, his grin so smug and openly triumphant that it cut into my nerves so hard I could barely contain a scream that tore at my throat. And when he said, sorry, little sister, loud enough for everyone to hear, drawing out the words as if savoring every drop, I heard in them not compassion but judgment. It seems you're not related after all. Mother has already spoken to lawyers about contesting the will. The supplies should go to the real blood family, to me, and then the rage-curdling declaration burst from me that my father had only died 3 days ago, and they were already trying to take away his inheritance, and my plan. This sounded firm, fueled by a fury I didn't know I possessed. Paula's steely laugh was sharp and short. We're simply preserving what should belong to his real family, she said with the cold certainty that was her shield. Durant, she said, had been too kind in life to do what was necessary after his death, but now that the burden of responsibility had fallen on her shoulders and Gaspard's, she intended to restore justice. My uncle Lorenzo, finally finding his voice, uttered a reproach. Paula, this is indecent, this man is not yet in the ground, but she, without hesitation, retorted, as if the trivialities of morals were more important than the essence. The truth does not care for time, she replied, adding that she had medical records, blood type records, and even a letter found in Rebecca's things, which mentioned a certain Tommaso, supposedly close to her before the birth of Sophia, and each of her words fell like a pre-calculated blow aimed not only at my heritage, but also at my essence, at my personality, at that platinum truth of childhood to which I had held on all these years. The mourners seemed to divide into sectors. Some approached me and whispered words of support, hugged me, held my hand. Others took a step back as if from something contagious. as if I had become the bearer of a new, sudden guilt, and in this shattering silence, Aunt Carla declared with iron firmness that Durant had raised me and therefore, in essence and spirit, I was his daughter, but Paula, without missing a note in her line of argument, countered with legal subtleties, legally, perhaps, but morally? Ethically, she asked rhetorically, as if setting the stage, and argued that the Esposito family legacy should go to someone with a real blood connection, Gasper, who had grown up next to Durant for the past 8 years, supposedly studied business, showed an interest in the family stores, and represented the carrier of the family line. And in that tense moment, Mr. Rossi cleared his throat, and his voice, deep and even, cut through the chaos with the authority of a man who had lived 40 years in courtrooms and knew when to speak. "Mrs. Esposito," he said, and everyone fell silent, as if the fabric of conversation were tearing. "Before you continue this performance, perhaps we should discuss the letter Durant left me." Paula's confidence wavered, like the faintest candle flame in the wind, and her question, "What letter?" echoed shakily, because she knew she had lost control of the scene. The lawyer strode across the cemetery ground with measured steps, avoiding puddles, and his polished shoes seemed at that moment a symbol of order in chaos. He held his briefcase like a safe with state secrets, and his face remained inscrutable. "Rossi was more than just a lawyer to my father, he'd been a friend since before I was born, the best man at my parents' wedding, the man who helped manage my mother's estate after her death." He understood the challenges that could arise, so 6 months ago, Durant came to him with detailed instructions and a sealed package he'd prepared meticulously, anticipating the blows that might follow, since the softness of the heart doesn't always match the vigilance of the living. "This is ridiculous," Paula muttered, her knuckles whitening around the folder containing the evidence. But her words were drowned out by Rossi's calm silence. He slowly pulled a large manila envelope and a small digital recorder from his briefcase, and it became clear that everything he'd said 6 months ago hadn't been an empty warning. "Durant," the lawyer quoted, said, "if Paula tries to claim that Sophia is not my daughter after my death, you must immediately read this letter and play this recording. Do it publicly, don't let her poison people's minds in private." The mourners huddled closer, as if a tight circle could protect the truth from attack, and even the funeral director, breaking professional distance, leaned closer. Gasper's smirk completely vanished, giving way to obvious confusion as he glanced from his mother to the lawyer. Paula, feeling her position growing increasingly precarious, uttered one final accusation, "It's a trick, you're bluffing." But her voice no longer held its former assertiveness, now tinged with alarm. "He knew about your research, Paula," Mr. Rossi continued, his words sounding like a catalogue of evidence. "He knew you requested his medical records. He knew you accessed information about Sophia's blood donation through a friend at the Red Cross, and that Patricia was helping you. He knew about your meetings with the estate lawyers 3 months before his death." My thoughts were jumbled, as if someone had carelessly thrown a stone into them, stirring up mud, and only one thing surfaced again and again. My father knew. He knew what Paula was up to, knew of her suspicions, of her attempts to undermine me, and yet he didn't tell me, didn't warn me, as if he wanted the truth to emerge in due course, not sooner. But suddenly, memory, faithful and cruel, brought me back to that evening, dinner just 3 weeks ago, when he, already ill, barely able to lift a fork, suddenly squeezed my hand tightly, looking especially serious, almost regretful, and uttered those words about readiness, about trusting Mr. Rossi, about how truth, like duty, comes to those who can bear it. I hadn't realized then that it was a farewell to a plan, but now his every word echoed in my chest, merging with the cold wind over the grave. Paula, unwilling to give up, raised her head again, and her voice took on a steely note of self-control. If Durant truly doubted Sophia's parentage, he should have discussed it in life, not turned it into a posthumous spectacle. Her attempt to reclaim the stage seemed desperate, but Mr. Rossi, without looking up, said almost calmly, "Oh, but he did discuss it, and in great detail," and there was something icy in those words, like the click of a lock sealing fate. He said that Durant had spent considerable time and money conducting his own investigation into the origins of not only Sophia but all the members of the family, and when he said all, there was a special heaviness in his voice that made Paula instinctively take a step back. Her heel sank into the ground, her expression flickering. Gaspard, standing next to her, took a half step to the side, as if an invisible rift had suddenly opened between them, and for the first time, confusion flickered in his eyes. Mr. Rossi pulled 2 items from his briefcase, a letter and a tape recorder, and, holding them in his hands, asked, "Should you read the letter first, or would you prefer the recording?" Durant made it clear he had to give you a choice, Paula. He said you always need to feel in control. She pressed her lips together and replied sharply, "I don't have to listen to this," and took a step away, but Mr. Rossi only nodded gently, "No, but everyone else will listen, and if you leave now, you won't hear Durant's testimony about Gaspard's parentage, you won't learn about the DNA test, you won't hear about Rex." The name he uttered struck the crowd like a bolt from the blue. Paula froze, her face contorted, her eyes widened, and everyone understood what the name meant to her. Who is Rex? Gaspard asked, and for the first time, fear crept into his voice. Then I found my voice, stronger than I expected, and said, "Read the letter, Mr. Rossi, let everyone hear what my father said." Aunt Carla came to me and quietly took my hand, and Uncle Lorenzo sat on my other side, placing his hand on my shoulder. This circle of family, closed around me, was my last line of defense, a reminder that, despite everything, I was not alone. My eyes stung, but the tears did not burst, they remained somewhere inside, like glass that had given into the crack. Mr. Rossi broke the seal on the envelope with meticulous care, and the sound of brittle wax hung in the air, like the crack of an old spell. Inside were several pages covered in my father's neat, confident handwriting, the same one that adorned my school report cards and postcards with inscriptions like "Love you, Sophia," and "Proud of you." The lawyer looked up and, clearing his throat, announced that the documents had been notarized and copies had been sent to 3 independent law firms, who were required to release them to the press in the event of any attempt to conceal information. Paula's face, recently flushed with anger, had turned ashen. "You have no right to threaten me," she croaked. "I'm not threatening anyone, Mr. Rossi countered softly. "I'm simply carrying out Durant's wishes. He wanted the truth out, the whole truth, so that no one could harm his daughter after his death." He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and a silence so thick you could hear the wind fluttering the flag over the coffin. Then he said, "To my beloved daughter Sophia and to all present," and as he began to read, it seemed as if my father's voice was alive in the air again, in every breath, in every movement of the wind, warm, confident, calm. "If you're hearing this, it means Paula did exactly what I feared. She tried to use a partial truth to ruin my daughter's life, therefore, I leave here the complete truth, documented, regarding the origins of everyone involved in this drama." Gaspar stood frozen as a statue, not daring to look up. Paula looked as if she wanted to run, but the crowd stood too close together, forming a living wall. Everyone waited, holding their breath. "Yes, I knew about blood types," my father's voice continued through Rossi's lips. "I learned about it when Sophia was 8, after her bike accident and emergency surgery, and I remembered that day, the sterile hospital light, my baby blood on the bandages, and my father standing outside the operating room with clenched fists, praying in silence so desperately that it was etched in my memory." The letter continued, "Paula doesn't know that I had a vasectomy 3 years before I met her. After my late wife Rebecca's difficult pregnancy, which nearly cost her her life, we decided one child was enough. The operation was cancelled when Paula and I tried unsuccessfully to have children, and Gaspar was already 5 when I first saw Paula. I have DNA evidence that Gaspar is not my son, but I raised him as my own, because that's what fathers do." Paula's face turned white so suddenly, as if all the blood had been drained from her, and the words she forced out came out hoarse, uneven, as if choked. "It's impossible, you're making it all up. Durant never mentioned a vasectomy," but Mr. Rossi didn't even glance in her direction, continuing to read with the calm that bespoke the unwavering confidence of a man accustomed to holding the fates of others in his hands. "And that's not all," he said, turning the page. "From the day I married Paula, I knew Gaspar wasn't mine. It was mathematically impossible, but I still loved that boy. I tried to raise him right. I tried to teach him the value of hard work and honesty, although I'm not sure those lessons stuck." Gaspar, standing slightly behind his mother, recoiled as if his father's words had struck him in the chest. His confident demeanor crumbled like peeling paint on an old door. "Mama," he whispered, looking at her in confusion, "what is he talking about?" Paula didn't answer. Her lips trembled, as if she were trying to say something, but no sound came. Her carefully crafted plan, cold, rational, with its carefully crafted legal moves, was collapsing around her like a house of cards in a hurricane, and in the chaos she no longer looked like a predator, but a cornered animal. Mr. Rossi lifted a small tape recorder from a folder, and a gasp echoed through the crowd as he said, "Now, I think it's time to hear from Durant himself." He didn't wait for agreement, his finger pressed a button, and my father's voice came through the speaker, confident, even, still full of life, as if there wasn't cold earth between us. It filled the air above the cemetery, drifting between the headstones, and it seemed as if he were standing beside me, leaning on his old cane, shielding me from the darkness one last time. "Hello everyone," he said, "if you can hear this. It means Paula tried to hurt my daughter after I died. Let me set the record straight." The recording had a faint hum, echoing off the walls of his office, the one I grew up in, the one that smelled of metal, wood, and coffee. I could almost see him sitting at his desk, a stack of invoices nearby, family photos neatly lined up, and a pair of old, wire-rimmed glasses. His voice was calm. "Paula, I know Gasper isn't my son. I realized it the day you accidentally left your diary open on our bed. In it, you wrote about Gasper's real father, your personal trainer, Rex, whom you dated during the first year of our marriage. Yes, I know about your yoga classes on Tuesdays, which weren't really about yoga at all. I know about the money you wired him every month, calling it fitness fees on your bank statements." The crowd gasped, as if struck by sudden thunder. Someone sobbed, someone quietly crossed themselves. Gasper's face turned deathly pale, like a white sheet, and he seemed barely able to stand. "Mom, is this true?" His voice wavered, hoarse, uncertain, as if he were a boy again, lost and frightened, but Paula didn't answer. Her eyes were glassy, her lips barely moving, as if she were praying or cursing, but couldn't decide which. Her father's voice continued, and each word cut the air like a blade. "I have a DNA test, conducted 2 years ago when Gasper needed the tests for college admission. The lab worked with complete confidentiality. The result is a 0% probability of paternity. But despite this, I still love this boy, because love isn't in DNA. I tried to be the father he never had, but Paula did everything to poison our relationship." "Turn it off," Paula whispered, barely audible, but her voice no longer held the harshness that, not long ago, could have forced anyone into submission. Her hand shook like an old woman's, but the recorder continued to speak. "Now," said her father's voice, "about Sophia. Yes, she has AB positive blood type, and I have O negative. That's true, but what you didn't know, Paula, Sophia's mother, Rebecca, was adopted. Her biological father is not the man who raised her." My breath caught in my throat. "When Rebecca was dying, my father said, she told me everything. The Mitchells had adopted her as a baby, loved her beyond measure, and were the only parents she knew and wanted, but when she needed her family medical history, she found her biological father, Professor David Brennan, who had AB positive blood." My legs gave way. My mother was adopted. The grandparents I remembered by the scent of vanilla and their soft hands weren't her blood parents. But that didn't change anything. They were real, and my father, was real too, even if his blood didn't match mine. "Rebecca asked me," my father continued, "never to tell Sophia about this, so as not to complicate her life. She considered the Mitchells her only parents and wanted Sophia to cherish their memory. But since Paula has decided to use this story, let her hear the whole truth. Sophia is my biological daughter. We did a DNA test when she was 8, during that very same operation, after her fall. I needed to know for medical reasons. The probability of paternity is 99.98%. Mr. Rossi pulled another document from the folder, thick paper with a seal, and, holding it up, showed it to everyone gathered. "Here is a certified test, dated 24 years ago, signed by Durant and the hospital doctor. Copies have already been filed with the court." The crowd began to murmur. Someone quietly said, "Here it is, the proof." Someone was crying, and I simply stood there, clutching Aunt Carla's hand, feeling my heart beating not in my chest, but somewhere in my throat. And finally, my father's voice, softer now, as if embracing me from afar, "I'm leaving a second letter for Sophia. It explains why I didn't tell her Rebecca was adopted, because love isn't blood, it's a choice, and I've always chosen her. But Paula, if you still decide to insist on your own way, know this." My father's voice came from the recorder, no longer with its former harshness, but with the weary dignity of a man who had foreseen everything, even his own defeat. "I have instructed Mr. Rossi to preserve my will as it was drawn up. Sophia inherits the shops and the main house, what I spent my entire life building, what I created not for fame, but for her, for the continuation of the name, so that she could have a world where work and honesty still mean something. You, Paula, receive the apartment on the coast and your legal inheritance, as stipulated in our prenuptial agreement. Yes, I know you thought you'd destroyed your copy, but how could you forget that lawyers keep records far more meticulously than your conscience keeps secrets? Gasper is receiving funds for college. I couldn't deprive him of that, because despite all the truth I've learned, he's not guilty of your deceptions. He simply grew up in the shadow of your lies, unable to distinguish between day and night. And one more thing, Paula, that recording, the one you thought you'd deleted from our house's CCTV system, where you told Rex on the phone that you'd make sure his biological daughter got nothing after the old fool died. I have copies, 3, in fact, 1 is with Mr. Rossi, another is in my safe deposit box, and the third is at the DA's office, in case anything suspicious happens to me. The moment his words faded, a silence fell over the cemetery, heavy and dense, as if the air had condensed into stone. Even the birds, chirping in the cypresses, seemed to have forgotten their songs. The 47 members of the Esposito family stood motionless, stunned by the magnitude of the betrayal revealed, their faces like marble masks from which the life slowly drained. The funeral director, a man who had seen more grief than anyone else there, looked as if he had witnessed a murder rather than a farewell ceremony. And then my father's voice, so confident until then, suddenly became softer, more penetrating, as if he himself were tired of being right. I want everyone to know, he said, that I forgive Paula. I forgive her for the betrayals, for the lies, for the intrigues, for the years when I lived next to someone but felt alone. I stayed with her because I made vows, and I believed to the end that maybe she would change, that she would learn what true love meant. But, I confess, most of all, I stayed for Gasper. He needed a father, even if his mother did everything to ensure that he never respected me. At that moment, many lips trembled. Even those who had previously condemned my father for his tolerance now understood. He was not weak, but great in his ability to forgive. Sophia, he continued, if you're listening to this, know that you have been the light of my life since the day you were born. You are my daughter, my legacy, my greatest achievement. Not stores, not business, not money. You, I love you, Sophia. Cherish the family name, it is yours, by blood, by love, and by right. There was a soft click, and the recording ended, but that click resounded louder than any gunshot. It seemed as if the sky itself shook, and the sound echoed in our hearts. Paula was the first to break the stupor. She spun around abruptly, as if fleeing, her perfectly ironed dress catching in the grass, her heels sinking into the earth. She walked quickly to her Mercedes, without looking back, as if the ghosts of her own sins were chasing her. Gasper, standing to the side, seemed a lost, dejected boy, not a 21-year-old man. He froze for a moment, unsure of his direction, and then suddenly rushed after his mother, as if still hoping to recapture some part of his familiar world. The others watched them silently. No one said a word. Then they all returned to the grave to give their father the farewell he deserved, without a scene, without shame, with respect and sorrow. A week passed, and Paula disappeared. She went to her sister in Nevada, leaving behind the mansion where every mirror knew her secrets. Movers arrived later to collect her things, but she left lightly, as if the town where her husband died was cursed. I stood by the living room window, watching strangers carry out her life in boxes, expensive furniture, designer clothes, the jewelry collection her father had bought her with love and she had accepted with cold calculation. Everything that had once sparkled in her hands now looked dead, lifeless, like the gilding on an old portrait. Gasper stayed. He called me the day after the funeral, and his voice, usually harsh and self-assured, was broken, like a string stretched to its breaking point. Sophia, he said, I didn't know, about Rex, about DNA, about what Mom was planning. I swear I knew nothing. And through the phone, I heard him cry, really, for the first time in my life, not the fake sobs he used to manipulate, but real, piercing, childish sobs. I know, I replied, and I couldn't believe I said it calmly, without anger, because I understood. He was the product of her poison, her lies, raised and crippled by them. His childhood was spent in an atmosphere of constant mistrust and pretense, and all he knew how to do was defend himself with offense. He was my father too, wasn't he? he asked quietly. Even though he knew I wasn't his son, he still taught me, came to my games, told me he was proud of me. Even though I was angry with him, I closed my eyes. Scenes flashed before my mind's eye, my father in the stands, applauding Gasper, his embarrassed smile, restrained but sincere. Yes, I replied, he was your father, he chose to be one every day, that's what made him special. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Gasper whispered, I'm sorry. For everything, for the way I behaved, for what I said at the funeral, for everything. His voice sounded as if he were realizing for the first time in his life what it meant to regret, and I suddenly realized, perhaps it was with this admission that true forgiveness would begin. This conversation was a turning point, as if someone had pulled a lever, and from that moment on, everything around him began to move in a new direction, slowly but inexorably. Gasper, the same Gasper, who had previously hidden behind a mask of sarcasm and arrogance, suddenly seemed to shed the skin of his old life and spoke in a different voice, calm, simple, almost shy. He said he wanted to work in the stores, not for the inheritance, not for power, or to demonstrate loyalty, but simply because he wanted to be useful, to understand what kind of man his father had been, and to repay, in some small way, the love he had once failed to accept. I remember being silent in response, because there was a lump in my throat, and just nodded, allowing him to enter a world where every square meter is saturated with the smell of polished wood and honest labor, the very store where my father started, and where I myself, as a 16-year-old girl, once stood behind the counter, counting every penny under his watchful gaze. Gasper started from the bottom, with no privileges, no concessions. I insisted he be accepted as a regular intern, and to his credit, he didn't even object. At first, the employees were wary of him, remembering the arrogant youth used to getting everything with a snap of his fingers, but gradually, step by step, he earned their trust. He worked from morning until night, unloading deliveries, standing at the cash register, helping customers find what they needed, and never complained. Sometimes I'd watch him from the office, seeing him patiently explain something to an elderly customer or helping a teenager choose a gift, and a quiet, warm feeling would rise within me, which I didn't immediately recognize as pride. 6 months later, everything changed. That evening, we had dinner at home, in my home, although I still couldn't get used to the idea and mentally called at my father's house. The smell of fresh pasta and wine filled the kitchen, and Gasper suddenly pulled an envelope from his inside pocket, neatly sealed and with yellowed edges. I found this, he said. Mama left it when she left, a letter from Durant, written 2 years ago. His hands trembled as he handed it over. Inside was a letter addressed to Gasper, written in the smooth, confident handwriting I recognized at first glance. Gaspered, it began, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but you need to know. Blood doesn't decide who we become. I'm not your biological father, but I chose to be. It wasn't always easy. You resisted like a wild colt poisoned by its mother's bitterness, but I saw glimpses of what you were capable of becoming when you helped Mrs. Patterson with the load, even though your friends were waiting outside the store, when you kept your word and came back to finish that science project we were working on, when you thought no one was watching, but you were kind, without reason, without calculation. These moments gave me hope. Remember, son, you are not responsible for your mother's choices or the actions of the one who gave you life, but you are responsible for the person you will become. Love is not blood, it is the ability to stay when things are hard, and to choose anew those you love every day. I chose you, Gasper. Despite everything, I chose you. I hope that someday you will choose us back. He finished reading the letter, and we both remained silent. The air was thick with tears, which we were not ashamed of. Gasper sat with his head bowed, tears glistening on his eyelashes, and he was not the stubborn, cold youth I remembered, but a boy who had finally found a home. I cried too, not from grief, but from relief, as if a father from beyond this world had finally united us the way he always wanted. We sat at the same kitchen table where he taught me to count, and now, as adults, we, two lost children, have finally become brother and sister in the deepest sense of the word. Since then, the stores have come alive. I've retained all the employees, those who served my father faithfully, and no one has left. They accepted us both, not as heirs, but as successors to the business, without distinctions, without old wounds, simply as children of Durant. Gasper took over the first store, the one our grandfather founded, and he does it brilliantly. He has my father's patience, an innate sense of customers, a memory for faces, and a habit of smiling even when tired, and I still teach at Riverside Elementary School. My father was right, I was destined to be a teacher, but every Saturday morning I go to the stores, walk among the counters, touch the shelves, as if checking the pulse of a living being, and I feel that it is somewhere nearby. Sometimes Gasper joins me, and the two of us, like guardians of an ancient temple, tour each room, talking to the vendors, listening to their stories, trying to preserve what my father spent his life building, not just a business, but a place where people are truly welcome. One day, while clearing out old things, I opened a box from my childhood, the very one where I kept candy wrappers and letters, and under the false bottom, I found a small envelope with my father's handwriting. Mr. Rossi, as he later admitted, put it there the day after the funeral. Inside was a second letter, the last. My dear Sophia, he wrote, if you are reading this, it means Paula finally brought out the truth I wanted to protect you from. Your mother's adoption changes nothing. The Mitchells were and remain your grandparents, because love binds people, not blood. They loved Rebecca as their own daughter, and you as a granddaughter. Even when fate severs the bonds forged by nature, it gives us the opportunity to build new ones, stronger than the old. This is the power of a chosen family. I've reread these lines dozens of times, and each time I've felt the words grow within me with something inexorably alive, a reminder that a true family needs no proof, that it is forged not by documents or blood, but by loyalty, forgiveness, and love, chosen again and again throughout life. The most important thing I understood, rereading his last words, was that he always chose us, as if each day he reaffirmed his paternity, not by signature on documents or by blood relationship, but by that quiet, persistent constancy that makes a true parent. From the moment he first held me in his arms, when I was still a small, helpless creature, he already knew I was his daughter, not by blood, not by fate, but by his own decision, conscious and profound, like a vow he made to himself. He chose to love, knowing that love requires everything: time, patience, forgiveness, and sometimes even pain. He fought for me, for Gasper, for Paula, so that all of us, so different and stubborn, would find in each other something we could call home. Every Saturday, when he came to the store, he helped me organize the shelves, discussed my schoolwork, and rejoiced at my successes. All of this wasn't just caring, but the expression of something stronger than a genetic bond. He was always there, and this always became the definition of love for me. He confessed in a letter that he kept Paula's secrets about Gaspar, hoping that one day she would awaken to her own anger and find within herself the woman who could be a mother worthy of her son. He kept my mother's story because she begged him to, but he never hid the truth of his love for me. His feelings were pure and genuine, like the first light of morning, without a shadow of doubt, without any attempt to prove anything. Paula saw our family as a threat, Gaspar as competition, and I saw meaning, the foundation of everything. Esposito, honest work, responsibility, respect for people, and a quiet pride in what we've accomplished. So when he wrote that the shops were mine, I understood, he wasn't talking about property, but about legacy, about trust, about continuing his work. He asked me to love Gasper if I could, because he was lost in his own wounds, and I knew he was right. Beneath the thick crust of pain and anger, a kindness always glimmered within him, and when I reread that letter a week after the first anniversary of his death, I remembered that day. Gasper and I came to the cemetery early in the morning, when the air was clear and the grass still smelled of dew. On the tombstone were simple words: Esposito, beloved father, love creates a family. We laid a bouquet of fresh yellow roses, his favorite, and stood in silence for a long time. The silence between us was special, not awkward, but warm, like a shared breath. He would have liked it, Gasper said quietly, and I knew he meant not the flowers or the inscription, but us, standing next to each other, without arguing or reproaching. He would have, I replied, and we both smiled. As we walked back to the cars, Gasper suddenly admitted he'd started seeing a therapist. He spoke calmly, as if sharing something that had finally stopped frightening him. She said I suffered emotional abuse, that my mother used me as a weapon against him, and I'm starting to understand that. I nodded. Dad saw it from the very beginning. That's why he never gave up. Not with you, not with me. Gasper chuckled and corrected me. He never gave up for any of us, and for the first time, there was no pain in his voice, only quiet recognition. Paula never contested the will. We don't know what exactly was on that security footage my father spoke of, but there must have been a truth there, one she could no longer escape. We haven't heard from her since. Only once did Gasper receive a birthday card, with no return address, a short message and a check enclosed, which he never cashed, and that refusal held more forgiveness than any words could. Mr. Rossi still handles the store's legal affairs, the same punctual, reliable man for whom keeping his word is almost a religion. Recently, he told me that my father left another letter, sealed and intended to be read on the 5th anniversary of his death. "You will be ready," he added, and his voice carried a certainty, as if he knew that all these years, Durant continues to guide us, teaching us even after death, not letting us get lost in a world where love often gives way to convenience. Now I understand that the deepest love stories aren't romantic at all. They happen between parents and children, chosen by the heart, not by biology. My father proved this every day of his life, and even after his death, he was able to protect us once again, to remind us that family is built by choice, effort, and loyalty. The stores still smell of sawdust and metal, just as they did before, but now that scent is mingled with something new: hope, warmth, second chances. Gasper and I continue to build what he started, not just a chain of hardware stores, but a community of people bound by kindness and honesty, the very qualities he considered the essence of the Esposito name. And perhaps that is the true legacy: not shelves, not bills, not buildings, but the lesson that family isn't blood, but a choice, to love, to stay, to protect, especially when things are difficult. And somewhere there, beyond the familiar light, I feel him looking at us, quietly, approvingly, and probably smiling, seeing that his children have finally understood the main thing: love creates a family, not genes.